Ethical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Lynn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
Good morning and welcome to Ethical Perspectives in the News. My name is Pete Welch and I'm the moderator for this morning's show. And hopefully we're going to have a nice holiday season show for you. This morning we'd like to talk about the ethics of we have been bombarded in political advertising and the realities now that the election is complete. I thought it would be interesting to discuss some of the perspectives, what we can expect to see in the future, and what we're bound to see a lot more and hear a lot more of in the future. First with us this morning is Mr. Gary Grant, who's a local consultant and was formerly Congressman Leach's district manager for 16 years. Good morning, Gary.
Good morning, Pete.
And also with us is Lyle Muller, who's with Iowa Watch and was formerly the editor of the Cedar Rapids Gazette. Good morning, Lyle.
Good morning.
And finally, we have Steve Sovern, a formerly elected state official, attorney, now mediator, and he does political commentary on a lot of the media events during the election time. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning, Pete.
We're post-election. We have a Senate seat that was more than $100 million in advertising. Who would have thunk it for an Iowa Senate seat? Gary?
Well, I don't know that it quite topped the $100 million mark, but it was pretty darn close. I mean, it came, I think, within spitting distance of the $100 million mark. I think that you have to step back and realize, you know, how people have communicated has changed over the past 30 years. Instead of having 3 networks and a couple of newspapers and a half a dozen radio stations in a media market, now you literally have, you know, hundreds of channels and internet communication and blogs and Twitter and, you know, you name the social media platform. So I think as the reason you're seeing more dramatic expenditures are there's just more things to buy time on.
More channels, if you will.
More channels.
If you don't mind me jumping in, Gary, it sounds like that you're sort of justifying the need for that kind of money because of the expense of media. And I have to disagree with you strongly if that's your point. The wash of money is totally unrelated to the cost of campaigns. The wash of money seeks to influence the process. We had so much more money, I mean, people couldn't buy ads because there was none left on all forms of media. It's reached such obscene levels that the utilitarian need for money has been far surpassed.
Well, Steve, I think you're assuming that money has, you know, in the past wasn't meant to influence, and that's just simply not correct. Political ads, from the first political ads that, you know, were run at nearly the founding of our country, were meant to influence voters. So it stands to reason that as you increase the ways that people communicate, it's going to be more expensive to communicate with them, because now in today's society, you get people that they get their news in smaller snippets from more sources. I don't know that I'm necessarily justifying the expenditures. I just think that that's a reality of modern campaigning.
And I'm not talking about influencing voters. That, of course, has to be done in a campaign. Sure. I'm talking about influencing process. That's why the money flows into the candidates from special interest groups, because they want access to the process. And it's not about influencing voters as much as it is gaining access to the process.
Well, if you look at the expenditures, Steve, though, it's much less about influencing process than it is about influencing voters, because if you take the expenditures in just the Senate race, the Iowa Senate race, the combined total of the amount raised, I think, was just a little shy of about $30 million between Joni Ernst and Bruce Braley. The amount that was spent by outside groups on behalf of both candidates was in the ballpark of $60 million.
Right.
So rather than, and those are not coordinated expenditures. I mean, those are dollars directly
theoretically
sort of targeted at influencing voters. and the way that they vote, what candidate they vote for, you know, and that does have an effect on policy down the road. I mean, obviously, you know, if you elect candidates that, you know, you agree with or you expect to vote a certain way, I think that's, you know, that's kind of the essence of the process. I mean, I would disagree a little bit that, you know, we're talking about influencing a process. I mean, there's certainly, you know, that some of the money given directly to candidates, you know, may intend on, you know, influencing process, but people give to candidates because they agree with them. They want them to get elected.
Well, that used to be the case, Gary. It did used to be the case, but we've passed that long ago, as we have the geometric progression of political contributions has been related directly to an interest in access, not in perfecting the process of informing voters.
Okay, now, Lyle, you had an interesting observation since you came from a specific media that was newspaper, weren't a lot of newspapers happy to have these political things?
Well, they're glad to have it. So are television stations. So are internet websites. So is YouTube. Everybody at the receiving end is glad to have that. That 30 million figure is all of the Senate candidates, by the way. The last Federal Election Commission report showed Braley with something like 12.1 million and Joni Ernst with 11.5 million. So it's only $23.6 million. That's a lot of money. And when you think about it, you add it up, and $30 million for one seat in the Senate, one seat in Congress. That is an awful lot of money being spent for what basically in Iowa was something like 1.17 million voters this year, up only a little bit from 4 years ago when we last elected governor. So a lot of money is being spent on this. And you have to think to yourself that if that much money is being spent, then there certainly is a public interest in who's spending the money, why they want to spend the money, and who they are trying to get elected.
Now, one of the things that Gary talked about was the campaigns themselves, Braley and Ernst, and those funds approaching 30. And then the other funds, the Citizens United, the PACs, the Senate Republicans, the Senate Democrats, and he had a ballpark figure there of 60. But if that 60 was added to the 30, we're talking a lot of money.
Yeah, a lot of
now,
dark money, yeah.
Isn't one of the missions of what you do is trying to figure out
Well, yes, it is.
who's making that?
Certainly is, and there are organizations trying to dig into that and trying to discern where all of the dark money's coming from, the Tom Stayers on the left and the Cook brothers on the right.
Explain to our viewers today what you mean when you say dark money.
Dark money is the money that gets donated to a political cause that does not necessarily have to be reported as a campaign donation to a candidate. So someone can take a look at an issue and campaign and send out ads saying, you know, reduce taxes, to take a simple example. And so that's a little bit different thing. Reduce taxes and call Bruce Braley and tell him to do the same thing. Repeal Obamacare and call Bruce Braley. Get gun rights. Or get guns out of the hands of children, and call Joni Ernst and tell her to take that message.
And these are all things that you at Iowa Watch have been sensitive to.
Well, we've been sensitive to, but it's been difficult for us to dig into it because it's full-time work. There's an organization called followthemoney.org that has just come up in the last few years. It's a nonprofit news organization, and it's like opensecrets.org, which is another one that does this. They spend full time with staffs to just dig into all of the campaign financing that's going on. Now at Iowa Watch, we've helped with some of that, but the real in-depth work is really full-time work now for groups of journalists or whoever it would be, watchdogs, who are out there to dig in and try to discern where all of this money's coming from.
Okay. I think earlier this last week there was a change in the bill that was passed by Congress that allowed more contributions. Do we have any idea what that effect's going to be?
I think this is probably the perfect example of how the system's going haywire as a result of this. There was a budget bill passed by both the House and the Senate, and apparently it's going to be signed by the President, 1.1 trillion or something of that nature. Within that, the powerful interests did two things, totally unrelated to the budget. The first thing they did was increase the money that goes to parties from, I think the limit is now 97,000 to $777,000. The second thing they did is to reduce the effects of regulation on banks like Citibank. So there you have the magic combination of money expanding its access, expanding its opportunity by raising the amounts, and at the same time influencing legislation, influencing the course of government by reducing regulation.
And having been a Washington lobbyist myself, the reason they added those things on the governmental continuation bill was they knew that the government wasn't going to let themselves shut down again and suffer the black eye from before.
Exactly. That, you know, that was the perfect opportunity if they could get it attached to the bill. And during the course of things now in Washington, they were able to do that.
And it may be that Washington hasn't done much else, but they've done a lot to take care of their own interests. Exactly. And especially when you consider that 90% of those running for re-election in Washington were re-elected.
And well, you mentioned something too. Lobbying, this ought not to be conflated. Lobbying is an important function. And Gary, you've done some lobbying. If I understand, that's your organization. It's a high calling. I think legislators, you know, need all the help they can get to understand issues. But the lobbyist ought not to have a $5,000 check in their pocket in order to get in the door of the member of Congress. And that's where the problem is. Lobbying is all right, but when you start connecting the big money, that's where it sort of perverts the process.
Well, for the edification of our viewers, you realize it was the one Iowa president that created the term lobbyist. Because Herbert Hoover, when he was president, would like to sneak out the White House side door, go to the other side of the Treasury Department, and show up in the Willard Hotel and have himself a cigar. Well, when word got out about that, there would be these people that would hang around in the lobby of the Willard waiting for the good president to show up so they could have a face-to-face to speak their piece about, and therein came the term lobbyist, and it was an invention of an Iowa president. I'm sorry, Gary, go ahead.
No. Well, I think that if you look at it from a different perspective, though, the raising the limits on contributions to parties, that actually helps the transparency of the process. And by that I mean those dollars are, the source of those dollars is required to be reported. The dark money that Lyle's talking about, of course, that's sort of, that's the rub with the so-called dark money, because you don't have to report the source. I mean, you can report the amount you've expended, but they don't have to report where it came from. So while, you know, this may not be a very popular sort of position, it might actually help the process to increase some of the limits on the reportable donations that would reduce the need of the system for dark money.
Sort of mad, mutually assured destruction. Although I do agree with your point. That is dark money, and Lyle, it's important to raise that question, is another recently dark cloud in the political process. Certainly we don't want to detract from the power of parties, but when you've got to increase from 97,000 to 777,000 to compete with things like dark money, it's important to try and get a balance, control on all of that.
Lyle, have you, as Iowa Watch, revealed any after election statistics that have upset you or seem disconcerting?
No, nothing that was unexpected. I mean, everyone can make their judgment on it. One of the things that we were interested in was whether or not the advertising and all of the hubbub about it would reduce voter turnout. And what we were able to determine was there was a slight increase from 4 years ago. So it wasn't as though voter turnout was suppressed. And we looked at the 4 years of the governors. And we haven't done any reporting on this yet. We did do some reporting in which we went out and interviewed some people in some different Iowa communities on election day. Went to Dubuque and down in the Iowa City area and asked people if negative ads, at least their concept of negative ads, and I have some theories about negative ads as well, but if their concept of negative ads actually kept them from voting or changed their voting. And overwhelmingly, these folks said they hated the ads. They just couldn't stand the ads, period. but still wanted to vote for the person that they wanted to elect into office. So it didn't particularly keep people from voting. One interesting thing is, though, a lot of people voted early. And there's not a lot of data out there on whether they went out just to get rid of all of the din that was going on with the election, or if they just found it convenient. But 40% of Iowans voted early this year. That's a huge number.
Okay. Gary, you had an observation about negative ads and, and getting a candidate elected. Would you share that?
Yeah, unfortunately, negative ads will continue to be used, Pete, until they stop working. Political advertising is no different from any other product advertising.
But it's not the only thing if you're going to get your candidate elected.
No,
you need to have more than just negative.
No, I like to think that negative advertising only gets you to about 45%. To get you kind of over the hump, you have to communicate why someone should vote for you or why you're the right person for the job. I hope that's not too naive, but negative campaigning works. If it didn't, campaigns wouldn't use it.
But don't you think that some of that's starting to wash? I mean, a lot of candidates are engaging in negative campaigning now. And so as I look at it, if you figure that 80% to almost all of them engage at it in some point in time, even if it's to respond to another ad, wouldn't half of the people who are using negative ads not succeed? And so I've been wondering about this whole business of negative ads, Peter, about whether negative ads are working or if it's the message in the negative ad that seems to connect with someone emotionally. Because if you figure a lot of people, there are a lot of people who are doing negative ads who aren't winning. And so if half win, half lose, yeah, they work half of the time, but I'm wondering if it's the message itself. There's something that strikes a nerve in that ad that still sways the day.
Oh, of course. I mean, you can't just simply say that negative advertising works all the time, because you have to there has to be a message. You have to, and polling, as you all know, is quite sophisticated nowadays. And what you're talking about is favorables versus unfavorables. The point of ads, both positive and negative, are to either drive up your favorables or drive your opponents down. So when you talk about isn't the message important? Well, certainly it's important. I think you all candidates sort of and campaigns try to strike this balance of message and technique. So you have to be, and there are a variety of strategies for communication, as you guys both know. You've been in politics, from micro targeting, which means targeting a handful of voters, maybe at the precinct level, to the macro targeting of entire media markets with kind of a blanket message. So absolutely, I mean, the message matters, the technique matters, and that's the balance that candidates and campaigns try to find.
And isn't there a difference in whether the negative ad is coming from the opposite candidate and who then has to say this message is endorsed by me, but instead it comes from a dark money organization where they can be vicious and there doesn't appear to be any negativity towards the opponent, but just negative towards the one. Doesn't that have a play in there, Steve?
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. They have no accountability in terms of having to be the person who serves. So to that extent, I think they're free to be more negative, if you will, and they identify themselves by these little letters at the bottom of the screen that often don't tell you much. Americans for apple pie or something like that. They all create these wonderful sounding names that are generally misleading. But there is an absence of accountability when you have these dark money groups, these outside groups, these independent groups that come in and just dump these dump truckloads of money into campaigns.
Okay, the next thing we're going to see is going to be caucuses. In what will that be? Another year?
About a year from now.
About a year from now.
Yeah, that's right.
And we're going to see the run-up of the candidates. I saw Governor Branstad in a recent article said he's not going to try and endorse anybody and that they may get rid of the straw poll in Ames. But Branstad's advice was to come to all 99 counties, visit all 99, spend lots of money, help the economy. So How's this going to affect the caucuses? Any predictions?
There'll probably be a lot of ads, all right? A lot of that. And the candidates will have to be here. There's more than 20 on both sides. We haven't seen anything like this since 2008 in Iowa, and that was the last time that both the Republican and the Democratic nominations were wide open. And so we'll see a lot of people. They were coming in, doing the casual visits that you would expect early on, where they come to campaign for somebody else. And while they're in the state doing that, they're building support for themselves too and making contacts. So that'll happen, and it's a great thing for Iowa, really. We get to see these people. You get to actually sit down with someone in a restaurant and ask them why they want to be the President of the United States, and they have to answer you. It's a great thing about Iowa, but we'll see a lot of it and look for ads.
Didn't that happen to you once, Lyle, when there was a presidential candidate out in the street?
Well, that was Jimmy Carter in the 1970s. And Jimmy Carter was out walking the streets of Cedar Rapids, and I thought it was kind of crazy. A crazy way for someone to want to be the president, just introducing himself to people in 1975 when the election was in 1976, and lo and behold, look what happened.
And wasn't Jimmy Carter was the one that really discovered the potential for Iowa. And of course, the real privilege for Iowans is that we have this almost one-on-one opportunity, so that we can fortunately look beyond the money and look to the individuals. I mean, you go to California, which is a sort of an uncontested state, and candidates just simply don't show up there. They just dump all the money into those media markets, and so it's a great privilege to be in places like Iowa.
Now, this is probably a horrible thing for somebody who was born in fourth generation Cedar Rapids and lives in Iowa now, but is that really fair for the rest of the country? Because Iowa doesn't present a good balance of the total overall of our country?
Who else would you have do it?
Yes, of course.
There is the person that works for the Department of Iowa Economic Development saying the safe answer. Okay.
Well, and I think the answer to your point, Pete, is it's a good one. Other states constantly, I'm surprised, frankly, that Iowa survived in this position as long as it has, because that you hear that constant argument elsewhere, but you also hear people around the country saying exactly what Lyle just said, that Iowa is a good place to start. I mean, people take their politics seriously. They ask the good questions and they show up. So, but we'll see. It can't last forever.
Is there a probably better than 50-50 chance that we're going to see a replay of Joni Ernst's victory speech that night, where she was guffawing in such a horrible manner, played by her next? I mean, did you see that, Gary?
No, I didn't see that.
Okay.
I think, and this is Iowa's a state where, you know, you have to. It's a good opportunity for candidates to get out and meet 10 people. I mean, I would argue maybe nowhere else in the country is that possible. That, you know, you could take a newspaper reporter, a TV reporter, and catch a future president talking to, you know, a fire department chili supper. And you know that Iowa caucuses have helped and hurt candidates. I mean, you know, there was, I mean, they're, you know, making a major mistake at a small venue in Iowa, you know, is likely to be broadcast on CNN. So,
or at an attorney's office down in Texas for candidate Braley.
Well,
I mean, nobody knows whether they're going to be on a hidden camera these days.
Well, and there's not television alone now. It's it's YouTube,
right.
And it's sending a video on Twitter. So there are all sorts of ways that this information gets transmitted.
And the turn now is going viral, isn't it?
Yes.
Is that they say?
right.
And you want to go viral in the positive way.
Well, and it's interesting about when you talk about going viral, and you mentioned Joni Ernst. She and her staff, her advisors, created the most impactful ad of the entire cycle in this nation. And what I'm talking about is the castration ad, for God's sake. I don't know whether we want to be known for that, but that wasn't even a negative ad. She was talking about her personal experience, as I recall correctly, and it became, frankly, the conversation of this political cycle.
Well, and I think that goes back to what I was saying about technique and message being important, because a castration ad at any other time may not have worked if there wasn't a general dissatisfaction with or a perceived dissatisfaction with the way government was working. So they picked the right technique. They picked they had the right message at the right time.
And I think the word I heard in an analysis from a political consultant was it was either going to be treated as a stroke of genius or a stroke of stupidity, and it ended up falling on the genius side of the equation.
It really did. Now, the sort of the end of that story was, and you made mention when Joni Ernst, in her acceptance speech, said, I'm going to go to Washington and make them squeal. Now, how is it that she's going to get along with her colleagues in the Senate when she walks in the door with her little knife in hand?
Well,
figuratively.
Sure, but I think that folks getting along in Washington sometimes gets a little bit of a bad rap, because I think that people forget that in our history things have been much more combative in Washington than they may have today. I mean, you've had duels, fought on the White House lawn. You've had, representatives and senators, beating each other nearly to death on the floor, of the Senate during, some of the debates leading up to the Civil War. So, I mean, you take that into account and you think people yelling at each other and calling each other names, maybe we've become a little too sensitive and a little too, prone to
Political correctness.
a little too prone to sort of talk about, the toxic atmosphere in Washington. I mean, nobody's fighting a duel, so I think we're doing okay. We're having some spirited discussions. We may not like some of the language, but I think we're doing great.
As we stay short of duels, we're all right.
Yeah, well, as having been a Washington lobbyist for 6 years, I can tell you, Gary, that they're still drinking the Kool-Aid out there. So, anyway, we've got about a minute and a half left. Any final last comments, Steve?
Well, big picture, and I've said this now frankly for 35 years, that at some point this money in politics and increasing in ads that would reach a point where people would be tired of it and we can make a change. I'm wondering if this time it may not have happened. There are a number of movements. Lyle mentioned one. There's representus.org. There's
Fact check, whatever.
Fact check, an interest in amending the Constitution to overcome Citizen United. Lots of good things.
Okay, Lyle, last.
I'd worry less about negative ads, because negative really is a relative feeling. So what one person's negative is not another person's. Instead, worry about fact-checking ads. Accurate ads is what we really ought to strive for.
Last quick comment, Gary.
We're all the best watchdogs. Get involved, keep an eye on what your representatives and senators are doing, and remember, nobody can buy a vote that's not for sale.
Okay, thank you for joining me this morning. And on behalf of the Religious Council of Lynn County and Cedar Rapids, thank you for joining us this morning. Go out and make our community a better place for us all today. Thank you.